Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very important session we are hosting today. It's going to be a quick 15 to 20-minute session on a very important topic of how and what's happened in the last 12 months. And we're delighted to welcome Adam Sapp, Assistant Vice President and Director of Admissions at Pomona College in California. One of my favorite schools of whenever I visit California, that's the spot I would want to be at. So welcome, Adam. And the first question, I think we just keep it conversational and take questions as we go along.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
what do you think has changed in this past 12 months? And how do admissions people start thinking about the process in general? What do you forecast as the future of admissions, given what we've learned from a crazy year?
Well, I think if I have learned anything, it is not to try to predict too far into the future. One of the things that I think has definitely happened, and this is true at Pomona, and I know it's true at other highly selectives. I talk to a lot of folks. There is a real sense that this is a little bit of a moment where we're kind of going through a reset in terms of what are the expectations that we have of students? What is realistic for students to achieve in certain contexts? More than ever, we have had to rely on those with on the ground understanding of what's happening. And so counselors have become more important, engaging students and parents has become more important. And so one of the things that I think is definitely one of the things I think you'll definitely continue to see as we move through the year is an iteration of policies that are kind of going to slowly, I think, make college admissions a couple of years from now look very different. And that is going to benefit current, rising seniors. It's going to benefit the juniors. It's going to benefit the sophomores. I think there is going to be this real commitment to understanding students in their context in a way that, I think we've always been practicing philosophically, but I think this year we hit a real wall of reality where we had to refine our understanding and be hyper local about what students were facing on the ground and how that was impacting learning.
Yeah, but some of the things that typically we all care for is students' engagement in their intellectual growth and journey, the rigor of the courses they can cope with, or even the breadth that they want to explore and wish to express that they are exploring, are all good things. How do you get that information given that grades are maybe not fully reflected in the transcripts? And that's why you engage maybe a lot more at the hyperlocal level with high school counselors. So what do you think is in store in the years ahead? And what do students really need to do to understand the basics will not change, right? Maybe the SATs and everything else might take a back seat.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, the fundamentals, and this is true of most private highly selectives, which is the world that I live in, the idea of holistic review, grades, extracurricular activities, testing if it's there, and essays and recommendations. Those, that mix of things, talents and supplements and all the things that we think of as the application, that isn't going to go away. But I do think that there will be sort of a more sensitive read to how students can live out some of those pieces when it comes to their sort of lived experience. So for example, we may have lots of students who are able to take really interesting, engaging, demanding classes, but not all students are going to be able to have an end of year evaluation of what those classes are. They might have internal grades, they might not have external examinations because that country or that state or that district couldn't actually execute on them. And so we're going to have to really trust that the schools are evaluating the students internally in a way that gives us a complete understanding of that student's capacity. It's not the student's fault. And so what I want the students to understand is they're not being penalized. Admissions offices are having to sort of rethink a little bit, recalibrate how we evaluate. The same is true for leadership and extracurricular activities. We used to live in a world where you could do sports and debate, and you could do theater, and you could do all sorts of things all the time. That there's a lot more inconsistency there. So in some cities and some states are going to be able to do this. Others in other cities and other states, I think at least for the next year and a half, maybe, it's going to be perhaps a little less. We're not going to be able to do it in the same way. So those are the kinds of things I think are, at least in the next year and a half, those are the kinds of things that we're thinking of. And so for me, this boils down to the value of communication from the student and the counselor and the teachers, the value of really understanding what's going on. So students completing their additional information section in a complete way. If the COVID question still applies to you in the next year, which for many it will, completing that in some way, and really helping the admissions officer not just understand passions and interests, which I think has always been true, but also helping the admissions officer understand context and real life. What is actually going on in your household, with your family, with your school, in some respects, maybe your state or your part of the country. There's just going to have to be more nuance in how we read and understand. We did it a lot this year. I think we're going to continue to do it in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to even maybe cite examples of how admission committees had to sort of rewire themselves. And if there are any incidents that you recall from maybe one or two application discussions, how did you dig for more information from the counselor and anything else that you think was really interesting?
Yeah. Well, the benefit of our process, and I know many private, highly selective schools have a process like this, is that you do reading, and then after reading, you run committee. And that reading is where all the evaluation is done, but that committee, and am I coming through okay? Because I keep getting a reconnect. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay, good. And I just want to make sure. And then after everything is read, then you go to committee, and committee is where decisions are made. And committee can take a couple days, can take a couple weeks, it can take, a couple hours. It really does depend on the student. So one of the things that is true of every place I've ever worked is that the instructions from the dean of admission are always make sure you have all the information before you make a decision. So if there were cases, and there were a few this year, where we didn't quite understand what was going on, we didn't quite understand what was happening, particularly with classes, instead of making a decision, we put the file aside, we sent an email to the counselor to understand, or we followed up with a student to get more information. And then once we had that information, we brought it back to committee, we re-reviewed the file, re-talked about the student, and then made a decision. So that deliberate process has always been in place. We just used it a lot more this year. So some students, for example, said that they were taking certain classes that actually were never able to be offered by the school in the second semester. And so their schedule changed. And we didn't really understand why. Did the student elect to not take the course? Did the student decide the course was too hard? Did the student somehow, make a decision that seemed to reduce the rigor of their coursework? Well, in many cases, no. The school just could not fulfill the expectations of the class, or in some cases, the teacher got sick and was not able to teach the class. And so that's not the student's fault. So that was not a reduction of rigor. That was an impact on the student because of a school decision or a school policy. Those are very different things. And it's important to understand the truth so that we can make sure we're doing right by the student, because that fairness piece when it comes to evaluation is really important.
It's so reassuring to sort of hear this from you, and also as a kind of collective representative of highly selective schools. It's good to know that there is a process in place, and committees have sort of redefined and engaged a lot more with students, and students are welcome to even reach out if they have specific issues to discuss. I know there are a few students or attendees today who are having problems listening in. Recordings for this session will be available, and those will be posted on our website, so you can join in. In the interest of time, because most of our sessions are just 15 to 20 minutes, feel free to post questions and also join Adam at the Pomona table after this conversation. But it's not over yet, so I have a few more questions. I know last year, welcoming students back on campus, the brave international students who traveled overseas to be on your campus haven't really regretted it. It worked out fine after all. And in most colleges that did that, protocols and safety measures were there. But how do you again not predict but hope that colleges will offer even a more fuller experience in 2021?
Yeah, I like the hope, not predict. Yeah. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think as many colleges and universities as possible in the United States are going to want to reopen as fully and close to 100% capacity and as close to a normal operation schedule as possible. I think the goal is to get back to where we were a year or two ago, or 2 years ago, when we had sort of pre-COVID, pre-pandemic operations. I think the trick is going to be that in many cases in the United States, health department regulations are local, not federal. And so some schools are just not going to be able to do it because their local health department, the county, the city, is going to place restrictions on them. And so my message to students is, as colleges and universities start communicating about this fall or even about next fall, if we, maybe we have a COVID surge in December, January, we're talking about that in the US with flu season. If it comes back, what are we going to do? We're already thinking about that. Just know that it is, in many cases, families, it is not that college and universities are wanting to pull back. It is often that local government agency is putting restrictions on all institutions in the county, and that those colleges and universities have to follow them. So Pomona and UCLA and USC and Whittier, we're all in the same boat. We're all under the guidance of Los Angeles County and the LA County Health Department. So the kinds of messages that we push out, sometimes they're often informed by that governmental body. And so I just want to sort of put that out there. It's not something that is as well understood, particularly by international students. We're not free agents in the way that they may think, but it doesn't mean we're not trying hard to give them a normal, complete, full experience this year, next year, and going forward.
Okay, that's interesting. I think we have to follow diktats of governments, local governments here in India too, and of course, a very, very strong national government, I would say. So it's really interesting that you made this point because vaccinations, requirements for vaccinations is also something many parents and students are concerned. Like, there's no clarity as to what some colleges want and the others don't. What is Pomona really looking at doing? Do you expect international students to be fully vaccinated, one dose, double dose, whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our policy for incoming students this year is a vaccine is required. Any vaccine is acceptable. The vaccine that you get must be given in a complete dose. So for some, it's a 1 dose. For others, it's a 2. For some, it looks like it's a 2 plus a booster, which will come out later. And so we are just going to say, if you get a vaccine, which you do need to get a vaccine, get the appropriate dose of that vaccine. For international students, and this is true particularly in some countries around the world where COVAX, the international vaccine distributor, has not pushed out the vaccine to that country, then when you are here, we will support you getting the vaccine here. I think the challenges are still that the vaccine is not necessarily owned by us. So I think there's still a few things to work on there because it's a county public health that distributes. But we are trying as hard as we can to work with students on an individual basis. The good thing about Pomona is our population is relatively small. So we can track these things pretty well. And students and families so far have been amazingly receptive and excited about the idea that they're going to be in a fully vaccinated space. There's going to be safety and protocols in place for health, but that first layer of defense around vaccinations is required. So we're hoping to sort of allow that to build some confidence in the community where I'm going to interact with you and you're going to interact with this other person and I'm going to interact with this other person and we're all going to be vaccinated. So, that layer of protection, I think, is going to create a lot of peace of mind and begin the sort of establishment of normalcy. That's the hope.
Switching gears, I think there's this other aspect for international students who are truly international with international passports is to get a visa on time, to be there for orientation and then settle in. And now with the quarantine period, is it something that colleges are figuring out how to expedite the visa process? And of course, the consulates are running on low manpower this time of the year, and but there is hope, and students can get emergency visas. The 2021 kids I know of have already started securing visa appointments, so that's refreshing for India, reassuring for sure. What do the schools do in case kids cannot get their visa on time?
Well, I think you're going to see a variety of sort of pathways. I think for some, and I've already seen some institutions do this, they're offering a fall deferral to enroll in the spring. So a 1 semester deferral, the hope is a couple of extra months will allow you to get the visa. You may start a little late, but you'll be able to basically graduate on time, essentially be a little creative maybe with some of your courses over the course of your time, but it shouldn't affect you too much. For some, they are saying a full year deferral is going to be required because we can't accommodate you in the spring. So we're going to perhaps reduce our expectations of a gap year plan. We usually want students to have a planned gap year, but in this case, we understand it's for health reasons. So maybe there isn't as much planning. And then for others, I think, there is going to be a push to try to get you into the country and get a vaccine to you through the quarantine period. And if you come in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks late, there may be a sort of generosity with the grace period of when you can come in. A couple of years ago, for totally unrelated reasons, we had a student from a country in Africa who was dealing with sort of a violent situation near the embassy. They closed it down. It wasn't his fault. He didn't get a visa until mid-September. He started at Pomona 3.5 or almost 4 weeks late, and it was fine. So, I think some colleges and universities are going to be able to have that flexibility, but there is going to be an end date. There will be a point at which the college university is going to say, we can't make up that work, and so we can't really credit you for this semester.
Great. I think there's more questions coming in. There are a few questions about value of liberal arts education, and that's what really was my last question. And
Good.
It's going to be interesting to have your views, especially now when you look at science alone is not enough to solve problems in the world. How does a liberal arts and science college like Pomona and like many other highly selective schools define the liberal arts, and what do you think is going to change again for the world?
It's a good question. I mean, so I just gave a talk on this to Education USA Malaysia, and one of the things that we were talking about and that students were asking there was, in what role does the liberal arts play in something like entrepreneurship or something like, reimagining the future? And I thought it was a really interesting question and a good one, because I think it speaks to your question as well, Arjun, the idea that no one particular subject, no matter how much you know about it, is ever going to solve the problems we have. It is an absolute fact. That is true. It is only when you understand how the interests and passions you have in areas connect to other areas that you're going to begin to solve bigger problems on a larger scale. Because economic problems are not just economic problems. They also have social ramifications. ramifications. They have race and class ramifications. They may have educational ramifications. And so understanding the interaction of economics with sociology, of economics with education, of economics with sort of race, of economics with history, all of those things are going to become critical to solving problems in economics. And so that's one example, but I could give you many. We at Pomona have an alum, Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry this year for her invention of CRISPR. And one of the things that she credits for the invention of CRISPR are all the French classes that she took at Pomona. So it was, in fact, understanding how you learn foreign languages and how communication differs in cultures that helped her understand that cells may actually communicate differently, and that communication is actually more like a language than it is like a biological process. So let's invent a tool that helps cells communicate better, essentially a translation process, which went from language to biology and turned into CRISPR technology. So, you can begin to see this everywhere when you start to know how to make the connections. And the liberal arts is the best curriculum out there when it comes to learning how to make these connections and becoming an expert in seeing complexity for what it is.
It's such a fascinating topic, and we could go on for hours. So it's unfortunately come to an end for the time allotted to us. So glad to have had this conversation. It seems like we should just keep doing this. So I'll see you at the table. And for everyone listening in, there are several other liberal arts and science colleges, many also a few from India. So feel free to hop around and explore tables and meet interesting people. See you at the fair.
Okay. Bye-bye.